Go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Wild Neighbors Speaker Series. This series is a collaboration with Travis County Natural Resources, who co-manages the Balcones Canyonlands Preserve with us, the City of Austin, and a number of other private and public partners also co-manage the BCP as well. Before we get started, I just want to quickly introduce myself. My name is Jaya. I'm with the City of Austin's Wildland Conservation Division. Today, we're happy to have Jennifer Leigh Warner, who is a fine art conservation wildlife photographer, here with us to talk about guidelines and best practices for ethical nature and wildlife photography. After the presentation, Jeremy Hull with Travis County will manage the Q&A session, so feel free to put any and all of your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll address them at the end of the webinar, as many as we can. And there's also going to be a recording of the webinar posted on Facebook and our YouTube channel that we'll share this afternoon or Monday. And on that note, I will stop sharing and I'll hand it over to Jennifer.
Great, thank you, Jaya. All right, and should be good to go. All right, so welcome. I'm so excited to be here today talking to you about ethical nature photography. And it is also happens to be World Photography Day, so happy World Photography Day as well. So like I said, I'm Jennifer Leigh Warner, and I am the North American Nature Photographers Association's Ethics Committee Chair, and also an ambassador for the organization called Nature First, which is an alliance for responsible nature photography. A few of the practices that they talk about in Nature First are prioritizing the well-being of nature over photography, educating yourself about the places that you photograph, reflecting on the possible impacts that your actions may take when out in the field, using discretion about sharing locations, particularly with sensitive wildlife, knowing and following rules and regulations, always following the leave no trace principle and striving to leave places better than you found them, and to actively promote and educate other people about these principles. So during this presentation, I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about knowledge of subject and place. We're going to talk about knowledge of rules and laws, expertise and responsibility, knowing how close is too close when you're approaching wildlife, and a little bit about photographing captive animals as well. So I did a great job of introducing me, but I just want to dive in a little bit deeper on who I am so you know who's talking to you. I am the CEO and founder of a photography company called Experience Wildlife, and I've been photographing professionally for more than 16 years. I've traveled all over the world. I spend a lot of time in North America, but I also go to places like Africa, South America, Asia, Australia, and I lead photo tours and workshops all over the world as well as online. Like I said, am the Ethics Committee Chair for the North American Nature Photographers Association, or NAMPA, and an ambassador for Nature First. I'm also a certified Texas Master Naturalist and a volunteer photographer for the Balcones Canyonlands Nature Preserve here in Austin. In 2020, I won a conservation category award for the NAMPA Showcase. And in this competition, this image that won, it was highlighting the impacts that we have on wildlife, particularly in national parks. So this image of this grizzly bear known as 399 in Grand Teton National Park crossing the road, and you can see the horde of photographers that were just aching to get as close as possible to this bear, and what kind of impacts does that cause on wildlife, and how can we do our part to make sure we're not impacting their life. So before I get into my topic, I just want to show a little bit of my photography and what I do. I am a conservation photographer, and that means that I do work with nonprofits to create media assets, be able to tell stories about work that they're doing to save species. One of those organizations being the Cheetah Conservation Fund out of Namibia. I just got back from spending some time working with them in the field. This being one of the images that I captured of one of their captive cheetahs that they have that was rescued and is being used as an ambassador when they're rescued at such a young age, they can't go back into the wild. So they do strive to do their best to help rehabilitate animals that can go back in the wild, and anything that cannot, to do their best to use them as ambassadors to teach other people on why it's so important that we have these predators in our ecosystem. Images like this one gets used on posters and educational materials, materials to raise funds and raise awareness. I also do work with publications and try to create photo stories to tell about the work that is being done. This was in outdoor California on the burrowing owl recovery program done by the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. So just a few things that I do with my work. But as much as I love to travel, I do spend a lot of time in Austin as well. And I do create images here. So images of wildlife as well as people working in the natural settings to create more sustainable natural places, as well as showing our relationship to nature. Some of you may have been to this location, this Congress Street Bridge, where the bats come out at night, and you've got hundreds of people gathering each night to see the bats emerge, which is just really neat culturally. I did say I work with the Balcones Canyonlands Nature Preserve as a volunteer photographer, and I do create images that can be used for all sorts of education and different types of media outlets for them, everything from mammals to insects, reptiles, amphibians, the creepy crawlies that I think are so cool, those little spikes, of course, our feathered friends, and not just using traditional photography, but camera trapping photography and even trail cameras to be able to see wildlife that you may not see with your own eyes. But all of it within the scope of making sure that we are trying to create a better and more sustainable habitat for our native wildlife. Okay, so on to the actual topic. My journey as a ethical nature photographer, it really began with this animal right here, this green sea turtle. I saw him on my honeymoon, and I was super excited to see these green sea turtles had come up to the beach and they were resting. There were signs everywhere saying, resting sea turtles, do not approach. And I was watching so many people walk right past those signs and get really close, even as much as smoking right in their face. And I was so mad when I saw that, I just kind of stormed off and I didn't do anything. And I always regret that because I felt like I could have done more. So unfortunately, I kept seeing these things happening in nature. And I lived in California, and I would see people approaching marine mammals on a regular basis, getting very close for selfies. And I decided I wouldn't repeat what I did with the green sea turtle, and I would start to document what I see and be able to use those images to educate people on why we shouldn't be approaching marine mammals or other types of wildlife. Why should you have an ethical approach? It's not only for the benefit of the animals, but also for the benefit of you. Knowing that you are having a positive experience and that you're not impacting the life of animals is going to make the memories of those experiences a positive one. You don't want to look back and think that you did anything that would harm the animals that you were trying to have, a magical experience with. So whether you are enjoying it for yourself or you're leading other people out into nature, knowing that you are having a positive experience and that you're leaving those animals better than when you left is going to make the experience better for you and better for them. All right, so animals have natural patterns in life. They have life cycles, like they need to nest, they need to den or eat or rest or migrate, and making sure that we're not impacting that, we're not interfering with those life cycles is essentially one of the most important things that we can do as photographers or even just as people who appreciate nature and spend time out in nature. I found this comic strip a few years ago, and I felt it was such a good example of people who are so oblivious to their impacts on wildlife. This photographer in this comic strip is being praised for spending all day playing recorded bird calls to lure a bird in, and meanwhile his mate is at the nest with her starving chicks because he didn't have time to go find food and bring it back because he was responding to these bird calls from the photographer. Strip. Not sure where you lost the screen, but we'll just kind of continue from here. All right, so making sure that you're not stressing the habitat as well as wildlife is also important. This is a good example too of something that people tend to do. They love to make birds fly. You get more dynamic pictures when birds are in flight versus sitting on the stick, but understanding that birds need to rest, that being in flight all the time is exhausting. So making sure we're not flushing birds on purpose or trying not to accidentally do it as well, whether that's in a vehicle, in person, or oftentimes I see people letting their dogs chase birds. So, or children chase birds for fun. So making sure that we're not stressing wildlife just for the sake of it. We also want to make sure that we're using the right equipment. So using longer lenses for wildlife so that we're not having to get so close. And knowing what we're looking for on what's stressing wildlife. So if we're seeing an animal like a deer with its tail up and its head, looking directly at you, you're probably too close to that animal. So if you are seeing this behavior, know what you're looking for and take a step back until it is relaxed. This goes for marine mammals as well. When they're raising their head and they're looking at you, it's clearly interested in what you're doing and on alert, which means they're not resting. So like I said about using the right equipment, this image, I love this guy. It was so overkill. He is completely in camo, his camera is in camo, his lens is long. And although you don't have to go to this extreme, it is nice to see people who are doing everything they can to be as least impactful as possible. So I did mention, make sure you're acquainting yourself with fragile ecosystems. A lot of times there's signs in nature that are warning you that this is a fragile area like wildflowers or restoration, and you want to make sure that you're not trampling the landscape to get to a location for a photograph either. I love this picture because this deer looks like he's looking at the sign going, oh, I guess I have to stay on the trail too. You might not always see signs, but you might see things like little flags, which indicate that this is a restoration area. And you want to make sure that all the hard work that people have gone into restoring areas and planting native plants is not going to waste because you're standing on those plants and trampling them or pulling them up. Also, make sure you're looking for areas that are closed to the public, that you're not just entering areas that are closed because they're obviously closed for a reason, whether it's not safe for you or it's not safe for the animals or people that are in that location. And that also goes for putting pets on the roadways or trails that they're prohibited. A lot of areas have very sensitive wildlife, and allowing your dog to run around off leash or even on leash sometimes may impact the animals in that area. Beaches as well. Any area that has pupping animals, sea turtles here in Texas, or if you are anywhere where there are harbor seals or California sea lions, being in areas where they are giving birth, they're raising their pups, can impact whether or not they're going to abandon them. When people are approaching, particularly harbor seals, they will abandon their pup to save themselves, and then that pup will starve to death. California sea lions also have that problem as well, and even places in like Hawaii, if you like to travel, the very endangered Hawaiian monk seal has that problem as well. So in addition to just getting close, obviously touching, picking up wildlife, particularly baby animals, can cause the animal's mother to abandon them, and then we have to call these guys to come and rescue them, and it's a lot of work and not always successful. So we want to make sure that we are giving them plenty of space to do what they need to do. Now, you might not be even just trying to take a picture, or you're not even purposely trying to get close. Maybe you're just hiking and you see an animal in your way. look for these warning signs like these Egyptian geese. These parents are very clearly telling this hiker, stay back, do not approach. And when you do not listen to what the animals are trying to tell you, you might end up like this guy and get a nice big goose bite in the bottom. So you want to make sure that you are, paying attention, you're listening to what animals are trying to tell you. So there are rules and laws when we're in, national state parks, things like that. So you want to make sure that before you are heading off into those places that you know what those rules are. Most reserves and parks, they have websites, they have information that'll tell you what their rules are. So making sure you know what those are ahead of time is going to help minimize any of those impacts. Some of these rules might be like whether or not you can enter at certain points of the year, whether or not you can get closer to wildlife, what those safe distance rules are, whether or not you can bring groups of people in. I mean, there's lots of different rules. So just make sure you know what those are before you head into those areas. Drones is a really good example. These rules are constantly changing. So before you're flying a drone, make sure you know what those rules are. Simple ones are you can't fly a drone in a national or state park, and you should never be flying drones near nesting birds. A lot of the national parks or state parks will have signs that indicate that it's illegal. And if you are flying your wildlife, particularly nesting birds, you might be causing them to flush, abandon, harm those nests or dens, or even if you're just approaching wildlife, you might be scaring them to a point of moving away from the areas they need to be in. Okay, so a lot of you, I'm sure, are, or not even a lot, I'm sure all of you are ethical people and you're doing your best. But we might not always see other people encountering that we encounter in the wildlife and don't know what to do. So just a kind of few guidelines on what to do when you see other people who are not behaving properly in the field. I like to assume that people are not purposely trying to be harmful. Maybe they are, but I like to just assume the best in people. So if I see people who are not behaving properly, I like to tactfully inform them of why their behavior may or may not be the best idea. Never fight with people. I learned that a long time ago, that it never ends well. You can't tell people what to do and expect them to listen. So do your best, inform them, try to educate them on why, throwing rocks at a bird's nest or whatever it is they're doing is harmful, and then report the behavior to the proper authorities. I always try my best to step back and take a picture. That way I have some evidence for those authorities to be able to do something. Otherwise, it's your word versus theirs. So try to take a picture if you can, and then find the nearest park ranger, police officer, whoever is in charge of that natural area, and let them know that the behavior is happening. They may be not able to stop it at the moment, but they at least will be on the lookout for any future offenders. Now, we don't really have snow a lot here, but if you are doing some traveling and you're spending some time in nature, watch out for things like these cold weather climates where animals are licking vehicles. Allowing them to do this can cause disease transmission, and they love to lick the vehicles because of the salt. So you want to discourage wildlife from doing that kind of behavior. If you are anywhere where there's bears are super exciting to see in the wild. It's one of my favorite animals to photograph, but people tend to maybe not remember all their common senses when they're seeing wildlife. So you want to make sure that if you are in bear country, you're hiking with bear spray, that you're making noise when you're walking through the woods, you're not hiking alone, you're just following some of those guidelines to be safe, because you don't want to have a negative encounter, for yourself and for the animals. This goes for if you're even standing on a road. A lot of times I'm seeing bears when I'm on a road, and you see a lot of people darting back and forth, and it's more dangerous to be hit by a car than be mauled by a bear. So you want to make sure that you're using common sense anytime you're seeing wildlife near a road. Also, wildlife need to cross the road sometimes. They need to get to the other side for food and water, mates, whatever reason they're needing to cross the road. and you want to make sure you're not blocking that animal from doing that. So making sure that you are leaving plenty of space, not just yourself, but your vehicles, that you're giving a wide berth for the animal to safely cross the road. So talking about safe distances, you want to make sure that you are following guidelines. A very good guideline is any major dangerous animal like a bear, a wolf, a mountain lion, that you're staying at least 100 yards away. And then just about any other animal, 25 yards. So this goes for deer and moose and elk and things like that. When you are talking about, your smaller animals, your chipmunks, your insects, use your best discretion, obviously. And if you're approaching them and they're backing up, you're probably too close. If you are seeing wildlife from the road, make sure you're not just stopping in the road, you are properly pulling out. That's just making sure that you are putting yourself and everyone else in a safe place to be able to view wildlife. If animals are in the road, don't force them to move out of the road. That might cause them to scatter or to move into a dangerous place. So just sit and wait and just be patient. And this goes for if they're walking down the middle of the road. Sometimes I see that and people are slowly creepy crawling behind them, which is making the animal very nervous. So sometimes it's best to just sit, wait, enjoy the view, and wait for the animal to move on. And then the topic that I'm most passionate about is the importance of not feeding wild animals. So most national, state parks, reserves, it's illegal to feed wild animals in those parks. So it's a really good idea to make sure that we're not disrespecting those rules, because a lot of times the animals are the ones who pay for that. A good example is this red fox I saw in Colorado. I saw the fox, I pulled over, and then I noticed there was something wrong right away, which was that this fox was clearly habituated. He'd been either fed or finding garbage on the side of the road, and he was walking right up to people. This lady is a park ranger, and she was very disgusted by how brazen this fox was. And I sat and waited, and this fox ran up to every single car that stopped, which is so dangerous. He's running into the road, sitting and waiting. Clearly a fox who's been fed right out of the car. And when this happens, they tend to get hit by cars and they die. So we want to make sure that we're not encouraging this type of behavior and we're keeping animals safe. This goes for owl baiting as well, or pretty much any other raptor. When we are purposely, taking mice and we're feeding raptors from the air in order to get flying pictures, this is causing them to usually approach roads, approach people, and they're not getting the natural food that they're doing. So we want to make sure that we're not participating in owl baiting or raptor baiting whenever possible. And also note that these type of pictures are not usually allowed in photo contests or publications either. Now you might be thinking, well, what about bird feeders? I have a bird feeder. Is that bad? I don't think there's anything wrong with bird feeders as long as you're following a few guidelines, such as you're keeping the bird feeder away from the window, so you're avoiding window strikes. You're keeping it clean because you don't want disease transmission. I know we had some problems earlier in this year with a lot of bird disease transmission. And be on the lookout for predators. Sometimes raptors particularly, or coyotes, foxes, animals like that, they use bird feeders as baiting station for themselves. So birds congregate and then they use it as an easy picking. So if you're seeing a lot of predators, take down the bird feeder for a little while, and then you can put it up when the predator is moved on. So not saying anything's wrong with bird feeders, just make sure that you're using it appropriately. Okay, so leaving it better than how you found it. What does that mean? Well, first of all, we want to make sure we're not leaving trash laying around, that we're picking up what we do find. I like to hike with a plastic bag just to pick up trash, and that we're not tossing anything into our waterways. So a lot of us live on floodplains, so you tend to see a lot of trash being kind of carried downstream. So be on the lookout for some of these waterways. You tend to see some garbage. It's okay to pick that up and take that away. We also have a lot of wind here in Austin. So when you're seeing things like masks or other type of garbage being blown into the trees, just kind of be on the lookout for that as well. And then coins, rivers are not wishing well. So we want to make sure we're not just tossing coins in for fun. And that's very harmful to wildlife. They swallow those things. There's toxicity into the coins. So we want to make sure that we're not adding to that debris. And I love this quote: interacting with wildlife only when it wants to interact with you means you're going to get better photographs. The animal's going to look far more relaxed and natural. So you're getting better behavioral pictures as opposed to an animal that just looks startled. A great way of doing that is using photography blinds, and they can come in any shape and size. There's physical structures in some natural places, but you could use a pop-up tent. You can even use your vehicle. This is a safari vehicle, but you can use just the window of your car or sunroofs to be able to photograph from, and you're far less threatening to wildlife when you're photographing from a blind. Also, you want to make sure you're being safe. So animals can be unpredictable, so you want to make sure that you're not putting yourself in harm's way. That means looking behind you as well as in what's in front of you. And you don't want to end up like these people. They went all the way to Wyoming to photograph a moose only to have the moose follow them back to their car, and they were completely oblivious. So make sure when you're hiking, every now and again, you're taking a peek behind you so you know what's around you. So a couple tips on how to get better pictures. Well, think in the mindset of the animal. Are you, to them, are you a predator or are you a prey animal? And they're going to react to you accordingly. Wear dark colors or camouflage. Try to blend into the surrounding. That also means not wearing pants or shirts that are making a lot of noise when you're walking. And then get low, unless it's a predatory animal, and then don't get low. But when you're talking about, some of your prey animals, getting low becomes less threatening and they're more likely to relax. And then avoid walking directly at an animal. If you can walk at an angle and avoid direct eye contact, they might think you can't see them, and they're more likely to sit still. And then be quiet. I see so many groups that go out into the woods and they're talking and talking or playing music, and that's just scaring everything away. So try to be quiet and you're more likely to find what you're looking for. And then never block an animal's escape route. This is such an important concept, that you're not preventing an animal from fleeing if it needs to. So when you see an animal, figure out where it needs to escape to if it wants to, and allow them that opportunity. So if you do find an animal and it looks aggressive, don't push it, just walk away. I know that can be frustrating sometimes. You're looking for something, but you don't want to have that animal attack you, obviously, or be running away to a point where it's hurting themselves. And just never chase an animal. If it's running, don't run after it. You're not going to get really good pictures that way anyways. So it's a really good principle to not chase wildlife. Okay, so you might find yourself photographing captive animals. And for whatever reason, there's lots of reasons there's captive animals. We have zoos and rehab facilities and rescues and things like that. So captive animals make great subjects, but not all captive facilities are the same. So we want to make sure we're choosing locations that are ethical, and that means following a certain set of guidelines for that too. So not all rescues qualify for the Association of Zoos and Aquariums accreditation, but any type of zoo or aquarium should qualify for those. So if you are going to a zoo, you're going to an aquarium, check these things out ahead of time and make sure you're choosing locations that are accredited whenever possible, which means that they are enriching the animals, they're having some sort of educational or conservation purpose, that they're properly taking care of their staff and the facility, and all sorts of guidelines that accreditation has. And some tips to ask. So even if it's not accredited, like I said, a lot of rehab facilities for wildlife, they can't meet the accreditation just because of the way they are, but doesn't mean they're unethical. But you can ask yourself a couple set questions, such as, one, is it an accredited facility? Two, does it serve some sort of educational or conservation purpose? Does the facility offer a human wildlife contact, and is the manner that they're doing safe? So for example, if they're allowing you to come into a tiger enclosure with the tiger being awake, probably not a very safe environment for you or the animal. Ask yourself, where do the animals come from? Are they born at the facility? And if so, are they following a genetic species survival plan? Were they captured from the wild, or are they bought from other facilities? And then think about what happens to the animal when there's no longer a use for them. So if you're in a facility that is specifically catered towards photographers coming in to photograph beautiful animals, and now the animal is older or, doesn't look in its prime, are they selling the animal? Are they destroying the animal? Think about that and where that fits within your ethics. And this quote, the best pictures come when an animal feels comfortable enough to go about its daily life as if you're no longer there. It may take time to build up the relationship, but the results are well worth the wait. And this being my example, one of my most successful pictures, it's won a lot of awards, been shared by a lot of very prestigious organizations. And this is a great example of an animal that is oblivious to me being there. She obviously knows I'm there, but she's okay with me sitting there while she's having this tender moment with her pup. So I just want to remind you of what those principles were that we talked about: prioritizing the well-being of nature over photography, educating yourself about the places that you're photographing, reflecting on the possible impacts of your actions, using discretion when sharing locations, know what the rules and regulations are, always follow the leave no trace principle, and strive to leave places better than when you found them, and then actively promote and educate these principles to other people. So like I said, I do lead workshops. I do lead field trips all over the world. So I'd love to have you. And, you can find all that information on my website at experiencewildlife.com. And I'm always open to any questions, which I know we're about to dive into a Q&A, but if you think of something afterwards, feel free to contact me as well. So that being said, I'm going to open it up for Q&A.
All right, that was a great presentation. Thanks very much, Jennifer.
Thank you.
I'm going to put some links in the chat. We've got a link to a BCP events calendar, a BCP interactive map, and then some other resources: the North American Nature Photography Association website, Nature First website, and Jennifer's website, Experience Wildlife. So I will put those in the chat right now for everybody. And I will go ahead and hand it over to Jeremy for Q&A.
Great, thanks, Jaya. So while we are letting people populate their questions in the Q&A box here, I just had one quick one from Jaya and I. The BCP, we have a lot of our feathered friends. That's kind of our big draw, right? So just maybe your 1 or 2 tips for getting better bird photos. And then if you have anything, a lot of our folks that are on hikes or whatever, they use cell phones. So 1 or 2 tips for using a cell phone?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, especially when it comes to birds, there's this tip that I like to tell people, which is to photograph with your ears, which sounds silly, but I always hear birds before I see them, especially in places like the BCP where it's very dense forest. Sometimes you don't see the animals as easily as you can hear them. So if you're quiet, and like I said in the presentation, I hear so many times groups talking, or when people are alone, they're playing music or listening to headphones. You're definitely not going to be seeing a lot of birds if you're not listening for them. So first of all, listen for them. If you can educate yourself ahead of time on knowing a few common bird calls, like the golden cheek warbler has a very distinct sound, then you're going to know what you're looking for. That also goes for understanding what kind of trees are they liking, or are you finding a food source? So if you're looking for hummingbirds, for example, knowing what kind of plants that they're attracted to is going to help you find those things. That also goes for migratory birds. If you're looking for birds in the wrong season, you're not going to have a very successful time. So knowing when they're coming through and what kind of things that they're attracted to is going to immediately narrow your search down on where to look. And then as far as taking pictures, some of those small birds, they're tough. They move really fast. They tend to have lots of sticks and trees and little things sticking out while you're trying to take pictures. So I tend to see more amateur photographers they're trying to follow the bird. So they're, the bird is flittering around and they're zooming around too, and they're not getting anything. Sometimes it's better to sit and wait. You know that the bird is going to come back to areas, particularly if they're trying to eat something or they're going back to a nest. So focusing your camera on the area the bird is coming to and waiting is going to be very helpful to be able to get that picture of that bird. And then if the bird is in flight, you want to make sure your settings are all ready to go, that you're using a fast shutter speed if you're trying to get the frozen action, and that you are planning to take the picture a little bit ahead of where the bird is. You don't want to try to get it where it is because it's going to move out of your frame. So making sure that you're kind of preparing ahead of time where the bird is heading. So if it's jumping off of a stick or a nest, that you're just slightly ahead of that so a bird's not falling out of your frame. And then you said cell phone. Couple things with cell phones. Obviously you're not going to be able to get as close as a telephoto lens, but that's okay. There's a lot of opportunities for using your phone. Some of these, same principles apply. You can use some manual settings if you know how to do that on your cell phone. But same kind of principles apply for getting those pictures. And then there's great things you can use with your phone. You don't want to, like I said, bird calls are really kind of a no-no in a lot of natural places, but there's apps like iNaturalist and eBird that will help you identify what you're looking for and give you information on what to really be on the lookout for finding wildlife.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I think this is a different organization than the one that you mentioned, but it says, is the Zoological Association of America a good organization to look for?
Yeah. Yeah. So the one I mentioned was the AZA. So the Association of American Zoos and Aquariums. So yeah, I mean, I think that one is pretty good as well. If it's the one I'm thinking of, but yeah, I mean, do a little research. If you're seeing an accreditation and you're not familiar with it, I'm sure that there's probably a link and you can see, and things that you're looking for, like I said, is making sure, just in a nutshell, is the animal being treated, safely, properly? Is it being fed well? Is it getting the enrichment it needs? Does it have the space it needs? And, we want to make sure that the facility itself is treating their employees properly, that they're not, having any sort of abuse. So be on the lookout for those kind of things.
Awesome. And you kind of touched on this for a second when you were talking bird songs, because we never, ask folks, to play bird songs or like that. And we ask people not to do that when on the preserve, but maybe a few words in regard to things like taking feathers and stuff like that in our national parks and preserves.
Yeah. Depending on the feather, that can be illegal. If you're collecting feathers or any wildlife parts from animals that are endangered or threatened, that can be a criminal offense. So in the sense of leave no trace, that means don't collect things, not just animal parts, but that can be shells or sand or any natural thing. You want to make sure that you are leaving things where you are. That includes stacking rocks. I know that's a really popular thing for some unknown reason to me on why people do that. But when you're disturbing nature, all of it is there for a reason. It serves a purpose. And as you are removing items like that, you are potentially disturbing that habitat.
Perfect. Next is, so what is your most challenging thing that you captured in the past? Like something that you chased and you finally got, but you're most rewarding.
Oh yeah. Something I was trying to do for a long time, is I was doing a photo story in La Jolla, California, and San Diego County about, marine mammal wildlife disturbance. And something I was trying to photograph was, a lot of the time the marine mammals are in the water and they spend a lot of time in the water. And you can even be wading in waist deep water and not realize there's a sea lion that's swimming very close to you, because they're very good at navigating the water without even you knowing it. So I wanted to capture an image of people who were on the rocks that they are typically trying to haul out on, and a picture of the animal in the water. So that split scene of underwater of the animal and above water with the people. And it took me a couple of years of getting in the water, and in California, the water is cold. Unlike the Gulf here, where we get that nice, beautiful, warm water, the water in the Pacific is freezing cold, even when it's hot out. So getting in a wetsuit and spending a lot of time in the water, and then, I never encourage people to misbehave. So sometimes people are behaving, which is great, but then it then does tend to make the pictures harder to get. So waiting for those moments and then hoping it all aligns. But I did eventually get a picture of people standing on the haul out rock while the sea lions were in the water.
Wow, that sounds cool. Can they find that one on your website?
Yes,
Okay,
they
cool.
can. Yeah, under I think it's under conservation projects, under sea lions or marine mammals or something like that. I can't remember how it's listed right now, but yeah, it's under there, and there's definitely that picture.
The next one's not really a question, but I thought it was a good comment, so I thought I would add it in. They said that some insects have movement patterns. When you were talking about how to get the bird flight pictures, dragonflies have repeated up-down patterns and damselflies, so people can look out for that. And I thought that was really cool. But then also really learning to use your manual focus in advance, because when you're trying to get things like bumblebees, it'll focus on the flower instead of the bee or what have you. So I thought that was a good comment.
That's a very good comment. Yes, absolutely. And one of the things that I do every now and again is, taking my macro lens, if you have one, if you're going to really just start focusing on insects. And once you start really just hyper focusing on insects, you'll realize they're everywhere. And in the BCP, there's some pretty cool, funky looking insects in there. So it's kind of just fun to just go in with your macro lens and just spend an hour on one insect on one flower, and you'll get some really fun stuff.
You have a lot more patience than I do, if you could do that. The next one you did touch on in your talk, but I thought we'd hit it again. Is it legal to shoot or film with drones in national parks?
Yeah, it is not. So if you are using a drone in a national park, you would have to get a special use permit. And I don't know of anyone getting those permits, but some big organizations like National Geographic or Disney Channel, they might get a special use permit if you're seeing one. So if you see one, it's not necessarily 100% because it couldn't do it, but as an average person, it's really, really difficult to fly a drone in a national park and not get in trouble for that. So I would highly discourage it.
Perfect. That is all that we have right now in the Q&A box. So I'm going to ask one more while we let anybody get any last minute questions in that they want. But other than the BCP, or maybe even parts of the BCP that are open to the public, but what are some public places in Austin that are maybe your go-to spots for a quick photo trip?
Yeah, I spent some time over in what is that place called? The Gerard? Oh, yeah, I'm trying to think of the name of it. It's over kind of near the airport, but it's this organization called Circle Acres. They do a lot of restoration, and there's some really cool hiking trails up in that area. I also like to spend some time down by Lady Bird Lake and the river over there. There's a lot of beautiful things, but we are so blessed here. We have so many waterways. I really like going down. I actually live here in Leander, and I spend a lot of time over by the San Gabriel River, and there's the dinosaur tracks, and there's tons of wildlife over there. Yeah, I mean, we're really blessed with a lot of good natural spots. So I tend to find in Texas, look for areas with water, and you'll probably find some pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, I know in the past we've gotten a lot of responses for Hornsby Bend. Of course, a lot of people go hike there and enjoy that place. Of course, Emmalong and the Barton Creek Greenbelt, which are parts of the BCP that you can go join in. I would also throw those in as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So it looks like that answers that's all of our questions. And I just want to say thank you for coming today. This was super informative. As someone who's not really a photographer, I learned a ton, and I think it was just great. So I really appreciate you and thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My pleasure. And if anyone thinks of anything that they want to ask me offline, can always reach out to me either on my email or social media.
Great. Thank you, everyone. And thank you for joining the Wild Neighbors.